Bueno, ¿cómo están? Les voy a dejar un subtitulado bastante interesante. Se trata, se trata acerca de la ultrasonografía en el paciente crítico. Es el ciclo de charlas de la ISICEM, International Symposium on Intensive Care and Emergency Medicine. Van a participar tres personas con un moderador que va a ser Fabio Taccone. Va a estar Antoine Vieillard-Baron. Es un intensivista francés que se dedica más que nada este, al estudio de la ecocardiografía en el paciente crítico. Michel Slama también es otro francés dedicado también al sector hemodinámico, la ecocardiografía, la parte del sector vascular, el paciente crítico también. Profesor y docente de medicina intensiva y el profesor Antoine McLean de Australia, es el único de habla inglesa, también que ha escrito muchos artículos acerca de la falla cardíaca, el rol de los biomarcadores en el CTI, la ecocardiografía en el paciente crítico y el rol del análisis genético también. Ha escrito más de 100 artículos al respecto. No los entretengo más, los dejo con la charla.
Hello to everyone. I'm in a special place today in Brussels. The pleasure to share this presential ISICEM chat with Tony McLean from Australia, Michel Slama from France, and Antoine Vieillard-Baron from France. And the topic today will be a little bit on ultrasound. Few questions, hope to have controversial response from our audience. And the first question would be, we have now in the era of pocket ultrasound, especially in the ICU, because we are using more and more ultrasound. Will ultrasound in the future will be our new stethoscope? So we'll use everyday simplified echo ultrasound for all patients. I'll start from Antoine, and then of course Michel and Tony will follow.
Yes, thank Fabio, my good friends. I am not really convinced because usually people think that because this is small, you can use it very easily, at least without any training. And I think that the main issue is that, especially that you have to be trained, even for small and pocket echo machine. If you don't do that, you will have big mistakes and big issues for the patients. When you learn to use stethoscopes, usually you are trained at the bedside by your mentor. So we have to apply the same process if we want to adequately use this kind of machine. So I am in between. I am not really convinced.
It's funny because when you look at the young intensivists, they always start with the echo examination. And after that, they take the stethoscope, and it's a complementarity technique now. I mean, the stethoscope. Not the first.
Do they trust the echo or the stethoscope?
They do first the echo most of the time. That's incredible.
Well, let's be real. You know, in this day and age, you could work in an ICU without a stethoscope. But you couldn't work in ICU without ultrasound or an echocardiogram. And if you had to ditch the stethoscope, and I'm sure a lot of people have, thrown it aside today, what would be different really?
So if you have to decide between both, so you take the echo machine.
But I think that you agree that, of course, you need the device, but you need adequate training, both. So which is, of course, the right way to use the ultrasound.
Yes.
Now, the second point would be, we use ultrasound, and of course, the main use of ultrasound, and not the only one, is echocardiography for the heart. But are we moving more and more to a kind of full-body ultrasound approach, either point of care or diagnostic approach? Tony?
Oh, definitely, and I think it's happened already before our eyes. I don't know about your intensive care units, but how many people put in central lines without ultrasound nowadays? Hardly anybody. We would automatically turn around and do a lot of our own leg Dopplers if we were concerned. It's the weekend, you can't get a sonographer in to do it. Lung ultrasound, I don't think we use nearly as much as we should, but it's only because of laziness. I think it's well on the way. We don't really have to even push for it. It's happening. And of course, echocardiography, how do you look after a sick patient without an echo is beyond me.
It is not possible to do, not to do a lung ultrasound when you have patient in respiratory distress at that time. So now, of course, the first thing that you will do is to put the probe on the chest, just to check if there is a pneumothorax, if there is a large pleural effusion or whatever. So that's really the first step of our management of patients with respiratory failure.
No, of course I agree, but once again, my good friends, they are in a magic world, ideal world, which is not the true life. Because I think you miss 2 points. The first one is that we lack studies explaining how to integrate the heart aspect with the lung aspect and so on. So to put everything together at the end to have the right diagnostic and the right management. And you miss another point which is in touch with my previous comment, which is that, okay, it seems to be very easy because this is focused, this is simple, but once again, you have to be trained. This is not because you take a probe and that you put the probe on the chest that you are able to analyze the lung, the B lines, the A lines, the consolidation, and to have the right diagnosis. So definitively, I agree with you, but there is a big challenge in front of us, and I think that the statement from the European Society of Intensive Care Medicine, very soon published in Intensive Care Medicine Journal, will give some guidance to organize more courses for training and so on.
I have a question on that point. So imagine that we are moving towards, with training towards this full body ultrasound. Do you think that there will be a doctor who will be able to be expert in all the field of the body, the brain, the vessels, the heart, the lung, the body, the abdomen, or there will be a champion for, specific patterns for some organs? In the Antoine ICU, there will be Antoine for the echocardiography, someone else from the brain, someone else from the abdomen. How do you see that?
That's the key point, and that's the key question. I do not have the answer, and this is really my issue.
I think it's going to be a case of not everybody doing everything. I think some people, for example, lung ultrasound is now a routine part of our echocardiogram. When you would do a lung echocardiogram, we'd automatically look at the lungs as part of the echo examination. But I do take the point that I think it's going to be hard for people to be really good at everything, abdomen as well as brain and all those sorts of things. But then maybe we're being too ambitious. Maybe we don't really have to worry too much about that. We really have to worry about those parts which we as physicians can deal with dramatically at the moment, which is, from my way of thinking, vascular, heart and lungs.
So for me, it's mandatory today to teach to the young intensivists how to use ultrasounds for doing some chest evaluation, abdominal evaluation, transcranial evaluation, and they have to have minimal skills for that. I'm sure that it is really useful at the bedside. And I think that for cardiac, ultrasound is a little bit different because, of course, they should have a minimal skills, but it's much more complicated sometimes. And then I think that at that point, we have to have some expert in, at least in each team, we should have one expert on echocardiography. But we don't need expert on lung, don't need expert on abdominal, don't need expert on transcranial, because I think that every intensivist should have a minimal skills on that.
No, but because you said that, maybe because you do not understand the beauty of the whole critical care ultrasonography, and you are especially expert for the heart, but I think you could imagine and assume it's the same for the brain, for the lung, and so on. So I think this is the goal that we have to reach. I don't know when we will do, and if we will do, but don't say it's easy, everyone has to do. Of course, I agree that it's a fantastic device to have at the bedside for our usual practice, but we have a big challenge to put everyone comfortable with that technique.
And Antoine, do you think we're aiming at the wrong audience, though? It strikes me, that we're talking about intensive care physicians, but maybe if we're going to be really serious, we should go back and teach all the medical students how to use ultrasound and let them start off with the basic of ultrasound, then as they get through their training, take it into any particular field. We're trying to teach people who have ignored it for years, and maybe they're the wrong group. Maybe we should go right back to the beginning and spend our time with medical students.
I can maybe, because of the matter of time, again have another question for you, which is, of course, ultrasound is important to understand, the pathophysiology, follow up the patient, so it's important a diagnostic tool. And of course, many people say that each monitoring should save patient's life itself, which is a little bit weird assumption, but still, do we have, more evidence, if I can say that, about protocolized care based on ultrasound? And if so, which is the frequency of the examination you should do to have this protocolized care based on ultrasound? I'll start from Antoine.
Yes, first of all, I will say, do we have, let's say, randomized controlled trial about the effect of antibiotics to save lives in case of septic shock? I think we do not have, while this is something that we do, of course, and unfortunately, every day in many patients. So I will say this is the same thinking. And regarding the use of something that I know especially well, which is the use of echocardiography, I think we start to have more and more studies demonstrating or even only suggesting that applying some protocol to have a systematic evaluation of heart function in patients with ARDS or septic shock, you may improve prognosis.
If at the bedside you have a patient under mechanical ventilation who becomes in very bad clinical situation and having a respiratory failure, and just you put the probe on the chest and you find a pneumothorax, so it will help a lot for the management of the patient. You don't need to know if putting the probe to diagnose a pneumothorax will save the life or not. Of course, it will.
Have you ever seen a good study on the use of pulse oximetry in saving lives in the ICU? No. I don't think there is one. Every one of our patients has a pulse oximetry on every minute of the hour, every hour of the day. So I'm not looking for things that are obvious.
No, of course, but the reasons why I made the question is that it's not the echo per se, but it's protocolized care based on a monitoring, which means that you change your therapeutic strategies because the monitoring is actively implemented in the management. It's not just looking at ultrasound per se, because I agree with you, it won't make such sense.
No, I think it's a key question, because if we forget the thing we can save or we can't save lives, when you do the echo, lung ultrasonography, echocardiography, whatever, you have to ask yourself to have a question. First, why I do the exam. Second, you have a formal conclusion, what I did fine. And finally, you have the conclusion of the conclusion, which is the adaptation of the treatment. What do I change in the treatment? And if you answer, for instance, I change nothing, this is also an answer. I mean, so I think this is a very important process to have, and you're absolutely right that we need to protocolize our approach to have the report, the conclusion, and the adaptation.
And which is very important is to have a follow-up of the patients with the echo when you do echo examination. You don't have to do only one examination and then moving far away from the unit, but you have to stay at the bedside, to sleep with the patient, and to check if, for example, your volume infusion improved the clinical situation. If not, you have to do again echo just to check why the infusion did not improve the clinical situation of the patient. So it's very important to do a follow-up.
And if it doesn't work, we can call you, Michel, at 2 o'clock in the morning to show the echo, right? I have a final question for the three of you. Is there anything you will send as a message as the future of ultrasound for critically ill patients? Any message, implementation of technology, whatever you see as something important to the next years?
I would say that the people who take up ultrasound, and particularly echocardiography, are really rewarded in performing it on their patients. And that should be the attraction for them. We shouldn't have to persuade them to do it because of statistics or whatever. People who do it, the majority of them will identify that, in fact, they give a lot of benefit to their patients. And I think that's what we should encourage people to say, hey, this is fun. This is really interesting. And believe it or not, it really improves patient management.
I think that the future is the technology. So I think that what we need now is to have a tracking. We have to track the flow automatically. We have to track the walls automatically. And then when we will have all these technologies which track all this movement of the heart, all the flows, at that time we will apply artificial intelligence, and it would be possible to have some like automatic protocols in front of one patient and one clinical situation.
As you know, I am 100% convinced that, for instance, echocardiography is a true device for hemodynamic monitoring. But if we really want to convince everyone, we need to go a step more, which is really to more integrate the study into the clinical scenario of our patient. And especially, I would really love to go into the room, to plug my probe on the monitor, to just check the heart, to record the study on the monitor, and to go back. And maybe a few hours later, another doctor will be able to review my study and to do the same study just to compare. And for that, it could be very good to have the interface, which is the monitor acting as an echo machine. For me, it could be the ideal future.
So I have to thank Tony, Michel, Antoine. It's our first ISICEM chat when I have someone close to myself, not in Zoom. And it will be a pleasure. Thanks a lot for your nice and thoughtful, yeah, of course, comments about ultrasound. And I hope to have you again in the next ISICEM chat. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.